So let's build a lead qualification workflow from scratch. That is so valuable because enriching, especially phone numbers, is incredibly expensive. So just not enriching any contact, any lead that you don't want to contact anyways, cuts a lot of enrichment credits and a lot of cost by extension. The way I'm going to approach this here, and there are many ways to do this, but you can basically look at firmographics, which is what you do when you create one of these search filters, say all the standards, right? I want to look at tech companies based in the US, 250 employees and up, for example, something like that. I wouldn't say that's a great list that is being built this way, because it's like the list everybody builds, but that could be one way to start with that. And then you want to qualify further. But generally, the better you build the list, the less qualification is needed. There are super smart ways, for example, to look at what technologies is a company using, what are their hiring signals, are they hiring sales roles, are they hiring this, are they hiring that. That all can be used for qualification and disqualification. I'm gonna sticking through basically descriptions of what companies are doing. And there are two elements to this. One is, what are the companies doing, what are the prospects doing, and what are we offering? What is the client offering? And does that match? This is what I'm going to build, and I'm going to show a nice way to programmatically validate those results. So let's start with a blank table. Always a good starting point. I very rarely use one of these, but yeah, in this case, a company table, and the data point that we have is the company domain, and I'm actually going to delete the other ones to keep this very neat. We don't have a LinkedIn page, we just have company domains. Let me copy those. Okay. Copy, create one new row, and then paste and override. That extends as many rows as you need. When you want to paste multiple columns, you need to have the exact right amount of columns matching from copy and paste in Clay. Anyways, so this is the data point we have, the company domain. Then the next thing I want to do is I want to know what they are doing, and you can do multiple ways to do this. You can do a company enrichment and basically find them on LinkedIn. I'm not using that because that has two breaking points. One is, based on the domain, you may or may not find it on LinkedIn. In this case, I guess it will be fine, but depending on what kind of company it is, they may or may not be found this way. The other thing is, then you're dependent on how they have updated their LinkedIn. And I would say the truest source of description is probably their website and not LinkedIn. It's very unlikely that a company keeps their LinkedIn profile up to date, but not their website. At least in my work, I've rarely encountered that. So let's use a different approach, which is something I'm a huge fan of because it's unbelievably powerful and also very cheap when you use it the right way, which is Claygent AI LLM powered web scraping agent. That's a mouthful. Anyways, it can basically go do on the web what you tell it to do with some restrictions. So browse enrichments, I'm gonna use the Claygent, and the way you use it is, and this makes a big difference in terms of cost, is actually if you use it with Clay's OpenAI key, or if you use it with your own OpenAI, with your own API key. And this is just because I have a lot of Clay credits and I've completely run out of my OpenAI rate limits, so I have to wait until next month in order to be able to use that further. But what I want to show is the theory of building that. So it's better to use your own credit, your own API key here. So let's go at it. I'm just gonna copy a very simple prompt which I've also found that in general, this is where the art in the prompting comes in. Sometimes it's better or more effective to start with something really prescriptive that tends to get a little more elaborate, a little more complex, but sometimes it's really just one sentence you need. And in this case, that will actually work very well to use just this sentence. Let's even use a GPT 3.5. I think that's what you have to use when you use a Clay credit, but that will be good enough for what we want. And it will go visit that company domain and summarize what they do in 25 words or less. Just like always, this / thing, and then reference a certain column. In this case, we want that this company domain is plugged in here as a variable. And this way, we will run, let's actually run it for 10 rows just to see that everything's fine. This will go, the Claygent now in the background goes to the company website, looks at that website, basically scrapes the text on the website and creates a summary. These summaries, if it would turn out, oh, they are not so great, then this is where the prompt needs to get a little more prescriptive. For example, if for the set of companies that wouldn't lead to good results, and this should always be manually verified, then you could say, visit at least one level down from the website. Go to the about or about us or team or mission or vision page, something like that, in order to direct the Claygent to not give up on the homepage. That is one way to do it. All of this can be much more complicated, for example, using a really cheap scraper and then running a model on that scrape. But in this case, I want to find a balance between using something out of the box that's a little bit tuned versus doing something super crazy. I think that's fine. Let's go to whatever, Norton Creative. Norton Creative curates hospitality through strategic design, identifying opportunities for brand growth. Let's look at the website. Yeah, that looks about right. Let's not go too deep in here. It's a very important step to do that verification, but for the matter of this exercise, I'm just going to glance over it. So we're good. What do we have here? First step, we do have the summaries for the companies we want to qualify or disqualify if they are a good prospect. Let's actually run it for all of them. Run column, run the rows that haven't run or have run errors. Cool, this will run. What do we need next? We now have the summaries of the companies. What are they doing? What we need next is to know what are we offering, and I'm going to say that always in framing it, what does my client offer? What does the client offer, or what does your company offer? And to keep this really simple, what I did was I went to a company's website and just said to ChatGPT, I want you to visit the website of a company and analyze what they do. The goal is this, to understand what type of companies they are serving, and ultimately to use the analysis to judge if another company is a good match for their service. That produces a summary that gives a reasonably good explanation and the basis for matching what do the prospects offer, what do we offer. And I'm actually going to hard code this into the prompt. So I'm copying this, and then I create a haiku. Just 1 second. I'm going to create browse enrichments. Let's use Claude. It says generate text, but actually it's just using Claude as an LLM, whatever you do with it. I'm using my own Anthropic key, and I'm selecting the model Haiku. Haiku is the cheapest model, Sonnet is better, Opus is best. And Haiku for this is already a really good starting point. The prompt I'm using is twofold. There is the prompt itself. Look at result. In this case, I'm going in the nested result of company summary. This is what the model should look at and tell me if they are a match for my client. Your response must only be yes, no, or unsure. And then there is the system prompt element. The system prompt is actually a little bit longer because it contains context. It gives the model a role, what it's supposed to do. So you should always think with prompting about directing somebody who's really smart and who has absolutely no clue what they are supposed to do. And this way, prompting leads to really good results. Here is my client company's mission is this, and this is what I've copied from ChatGPT before. Usually this would be expert input, so the better this is, the better the scoring will be. What I'm gonna do next is creativity. It's a tiny detail. It basically is a measure of how much will the model select the most likely next part of the response, or how much will it select a not least likely, but like basically not the most likely, but maybe the second most or the third most likely of what could come after a certain token, after a certain word. So basically what to remember is when you analyze stuff, you don't want a lot of creativity. Stick to your guns and not stick to your guns, but like creativity high is more interesting when you want to create more varied responses, but this is not the objective here. So okay, the rest we don't need so much. Run settings, everything can stay the same. Continue to add fields. I would recommend not mapping it out just to keep it clean. In this case we don't need it, and just run for 10 rows. Okay, so that's actually a lot of unsures. Okay, anyways, the goal should be to get to a clear yes or no, but this is a limitation of using just a very general description of what the company is doing. And this is where those results can be improved the most, by being really good at the summary of what the client company is doing, and looking at the summaries of the prospects. But let's just keep this at Claude match, and I'm just gonna leave it with those unsures. That's fine for this, because the trick here is actually to be multi-model and to run multiple columns on that. And I'm gonna do that by duplicating this column. This is Sonnet match. As you can see in the title, I'm now using the beta model of Anthropic. Everything else stays the same, and run this for 19 rows. So here we already see something interesting. So in general, the Sonnet is actually the best model to run this. If I would only run one model, it would be Sonnet. And what I find interesting is you see very few or no lines where there is a no and a yes. There may be an unsure and a yes, or an unsure as a no, but there is no yes and a no on the other side, which is already a pretty good indication to me. That basically says Sonnet gets it a little bit better than Claude, but we are gonna have a little bit of a democratic process here, because I'm gonna run even a third model, and then only if two or more are yes, no, or unsure, this is gonna be the response. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna add a Gemini. Let's do this for fun. Gemini. I have more experience working with GPT. Gemini is the latest that I've added, so I wouldn't be able to make a judgment how good it is in the whole context. But I think for this exercise, and especially with that multimodality that we are using here, multimodality in the sense of using multiple models, I don't even know if that's the right way to say it. Anyways, we're using more models, and I'm just going to run with Gemini. Just got my API key for that today. We should be fine on that. And because it's a little bit different structured, it doesn't have a system prompt. We kind of need to take the prompts, the system prompt and the actual prompt together. Let's start with the system prompt because it gives the context. And let's input the work, the task that we have at this point. There's always, this is one of those things where it's important to experiment. It will lead to slightly different results depending on where you put what. But logically, this is the context, this is what you are supposed to do, this is more information about what you need to do your work, and then a little bit how the output should be structured, that I want yes, no, or unsure. Look at company summary, look at the result, always reselect those variables because I copied it from another workflow, that this doesn't get messed up. Creativity, we have the same. They use a little bit of different numbers, but it's the same concept. Don't want to stop the sequence. Let's leave all of that as it is. Don't map out the response, and that should even work right off the start. Fingers crossed. Gemini running, it's pretty quick. Wonderful. Okay, so what do we have here? Gemini, I really like keeping titles neat. This will not be such a complicated workflow, but once you get to 20, 30, 40, 50 columns, it is so crucial to have really good, really descriptive names for your columns, because otherwise you will get completely messed up in what should go where, what should be referenced by what. And what I also do is I put the discerning factor in the beginning, so that means I don't call this column match and then Claude or Sonnet or whatever, but I put that right at the beginning, because in the end this is where I want to go into, oh, I want the result of the Sonnet match. And when you look at how these lists are structured, once your column titles are a little bit longer, you may only see the beginning of the column name, which is why it's really helpful to put the most important thing in the beginning. I think that's what I wanted to say. Anyways. And how do we put all of this together? And here it's actually quite nice to use a formula, and I'm just gonna do it like this. I'm gonna copy part of the formula. So here's how you do that. Because I won't just go over it manually. The first one, all models say no, that should be a no. The second one, all models say yes, that should be a yes. The third one model says unsure, two say yes, that should be a yes, and so on and so on. So using formulas, which is, they feel, I mean, honestly, in a game that would be like the absolute overpowered gun, they feel almost hacky. They are so good. So in the way you do it is, instead of writing, I'm just going to show that again. Instead of writing code, JavaScript or whatever, I can just prompt Clay to write a certain formula for me. I think it's really beautifully integrated. It's very usable, and this is how it goes. So get, in the sense of look at, get the first result from Claude, then get, that is not what I want, get the Sonnet result. No, I don't want that. Disable, thanks. And then get the Gemini result. Then I'm just gonna paste, because that takes a little bit of try and error. At least for me, it's really specifically how you word things. You have to, this is again this person that can write code, but they absolutely have no clue what you want to do. You need to be really, really clear, and you can't be ambiguous. The language needs to be very precise and unambiguous. And in this case, it's going to be if any two or more responses are the same, print that. Print meaning output that, whatever. Let's use output. Output that. If the answer would be blank, say no. I had one or two cases where, for example, the model gave no and a full stop as a response, and then it wouldn't be matched here, and then it would look a little weird, and in order to still get good results, I, in this case, want to be clear that it is a no, so we don't have blank output. Anyways, the most important part is look at the 3 responses. That's always yes, no, or unsure. If any 2 or more responses are the same, output that. If the answer would be blank, say no. Generate formula, then we have the wonderful formula preview here, which I think is so well integrated because of 2 things. I can see row 1, this is the output, and these are the inputs, and I can verify that. There are other neat little details in here, but let's just leave it at that so far. Actually, I want to show this. When you need to use a term that is in one of the columns, you can actually hover over this and copy it out of this. I think that is super nice, and it saves a ton of time clicking back and forth. Anyway, so we now have verified. Gemini says no, Sonnet says no, Claude says no, this is a no. We have 2 that say unsure, this is unsure. We have 2 that say no, this is a no. Easy. Output, say formula, and here we go. Consensus response. I like that. I like that term. Let's just say qualified. Let's just call it qualified. And there we go. This is it. And what I would always recommend to show this to a client is to duplicate the view, to call this view clean view or whatever makes sense in your context. And here you can adjust how this table is presented, because a client usually doesn't care about the work or the logic of the tables. What they want is the result, right? And you can even write that to another table, but that would be a different clip. And this is what we got in the end. We got the list of domains. We look at what do they do. We look at what do we do. We match that together and say, this is a fit, this is not a fit, and we run that. Maybe I should show this when this view is open. This is the summary of the prospect. We run this once. Is it a match? We run this again with a different model. Is it a match? And we run it with a third model. And because these models are so cheap to use, this is basically free even for thousands of rows. And that is then put together in this column, which basically says in the end, this is a good prospect or not. Here we have the clean view. That's basically it. As a little add-on, maybe I show how to calculate the model cost. I did that in the LinkedIn post that describes this calculation, where I mentioned this build from scratch, but here's how to calculate that. So for the Claygent using OpenAI, it's actually super simple. It should, I'm not sure why it doesn't here. Usually it shows the cost. Yeah, that's just a thing that happens right now, that maybe it's because I didn't use my API key. Anyways, doesn't matter so much. The cost here is a Clay credit. Yeah, this is why I didn't show that. The more interesting part is when we look at those results. So we see 198 input for output tokens, and here I have that's the wrong calculator. That should be the model cost. Okay. There we have it. This is actually the calculation I showed before, so it doesn't matter the individual number because it's so cheap. Let me make that a little bit bigger. So we have about 200 input tokens, doesn't matter. We have very few output tokens. I think it was 4 in this case, 4 output tokens. And what does that mean? Because 1 million input tokens cost 25 cents, and 1 million output tokens cost $1.25. easy calculation, and that is, let's look at it. This is a cent, this is a tenth of a cent, this is a hundredth of a cent. So this is 5,000ths of a cent. Very cheap. And when you even consider running that across 5,000 columns, this is basically just this number times 5,000. Because it's so cheap, we still end up at 30 cents. What does that practically mean? Practically, that means that this qualification column will cost 30 cents to run across 5,000 companies. Cheap. And the price is, it's actually, as a matter of fact, 12 times more expensive to run Sonnet. But when we look at the price here, let's actually use the right number, 200, we still end up at 1 cent, tenth of a cent, 700th of a cent, which would mean $3.30 for 5,000 enrichments, or 5,000, not enrichments, 5,000 qualifications. And Gemini is approximately, I think, twice the price of Claude, so that would be 60 cents. So we run this verification across 3 models for 5,000 companies for $5. I think that's a pretty clear case why it makes so much sense to use your own API keys. And here for the Claygent, we could use the same model, we can use Clay credits, whatever, but it makes most sense to use your own keys. And this basically means you can get to this qualification step that we see here in the clean view for about $5-6 for 5,000 companies. Let's make it an even 10 for 10,000. And I think that's just a great use case to run a workflow like this. Hit me up with questions.